Dear queens, note of the world, and kings and kings/queens, note as individuals, and dear individuals, know how the individual is one, and know how the species identity of volume is one, and how the identity of one is distinct from the identity of two. So the number system, anything anybody could invent or make up, it works though because it has what is more finite and greater than its volume, well as the value, its volume as value, and where volume equals value as nature / nature as value, distinctly, non-distinctly, and simultaneously. Nature is right to left and left to right. All exceptions in exception nature are in demonstration of the same thing, where positive value nature progressions acts in nature, means out of nowhere, including especially differentially regarding where we are and how we are, quality as fact treatment nature, and relative as each modern country's name and uses of it at all locations, areas, states. Therefore, what is forced entertained by all leaders, no matter how powerful they get, what is forced on the individual volume. See, there are proofs that President Kennedy, God rest his soul, he said that there is a conspiracy against this country. It's against every country. He also said, think not what you could do for yourselves, but what you could do for your country. But he was also leading up, there are proofs, everyone is leading up to teach about the exploitations of exceptions and of exception nature. For example, this is how I interpret. And then, this is, in other words, when you use what is true always and not denying or exceptions having or valuing them having been denied. See, we have a whole bunch of exceptions self-valued by everyone having been denied regarding, for example, facts and names treatments and times treatments of American history. And that rolls with that for all different juxtaposed motivations. There is also that one motivation of the breaching method. And but that was left out and is left out of people's logic. And that was what the predicate acts, that was the worst roles with the worst predicate acts, with the worst criminal insidiousness natures, the worst wrongdoers and wrongdoing associated with the criminal foreign influences of that breaching method that originally instilled, before our founding parents were born, had slavery entrenched in North and South America, had, quote, experts, unquote, on logic, criminally foreign influence, delusions wrought, had experts of the branches of government individually grouped and together with them in collusion, further and further, not just from formal locations, to keep that in collusion further and further, all locations and phenomenon manifest within as that, to collusion with all locations, where and how everyone was ignoring what came and sustained itself, a method that sustained itself against Native Americans A through Z, sustained that. Then more and more sustained it within as against colonists A through Z and against Native American A through Z, still sustained, sickly distinctly, against everybody, sickly distinctly more and more. sickly distinctly at all locations, formally. Therefore, all, fake different, arrays of different opinion natures, conviction natures, criminal and seditious natures at all locations. Because nature is going to keep demonstrating complete criminal foreign influence possession of the identities of these names of countries, where and how they are the only ones that can be used by individuals, where and how we are the species body and the individual body. Voice prevented. See, the exceptions in exception nature are leveraged against each of our countries, individually grouped too. And see, but not just the ways they explain on paper. So of course they have differences. Nature itself is demonstrating they painted themselves into corners. They cannot pretend that, that has to know self-value too. Where and how there was crazy reactions of groups and people, real and or made up. We have formally people that deal with formal evidence reception, stacking fabricated audio and video into databases, private and timed. And into other, and note, none of the jobs of the titles originally still are there to accept evidences as such. In other words, correlation actually with integrity and honesty. In other words, that knows that a predicate acts delivery system method /S, where everyone will have those motivations that you need real for evil and for self-value time, collusion with the illusions of criminal insidiousness natures, of positive treatment natures, note styles, sense and sensibilities too, because this is relevant where and how people are preventing people calm means to defend themselves, and simultaneously they are preventing them loud means where people need to get loud too, and to stop. In other words, it is recorded that the same people through the news media pretending with passions and emotions that they're about studying crimes and how to counter them and legitimacy of themselves and their colleagues individually grouped and together, and with the parties. And as the parties, then they differentially pretended to say that these are people with overt criminal enterprises. So there's a man who says his name is on Facebook, who said his name was Jerry Miller, Officer Jerry Miller, on Facebook, right before the pandemic. And he brought up names of a Jerry Kerr. There's a Jerry Kerr and his son. I don't know, they sought me out to make exceptions, and where and how they made all these confessions. And then they hid that which was recorded by their roles with overt criminal enterprises and with Mayor Gold's family, a whole bunch of people associated with Mayor Gold's family and his neighbors, people that lived around him, and people that used corners all the way from Main Street in Old Weathersfield and along Church Street in Old Weathersfield, all the way to CCSU, along up Wells Road, all the way to CCSU, where our people enter campuses, enter cities, and intra campuses, involved with relative identity thefts and frauds instances, offensive evidence reception, worse than racketeering, that worse than war crimes, originally and still that which the answers are telling about, where what caused slavery is a question, and was a question, and where and how other was pretended, and where and how that is evidence, and where and how people are recorded pretending not to do that and getting away with it because they're saying they don't see evidences, they don't see research. They are preventing people from using their free speech outside of courts to demonstrate how through time people from the youngest grades are taken to roles with people from off campuses already influencing and having influenced roles with quick instances of positive negative treatments designed originally and still to maintain roles with identity theft fraud method as methods that can't defend themselves, where and how it counts, where and how we are being and having been exploited at all locations by one method. And then that method further was his uses of remote uses of all the identity ground locations. With that having been sustained, it's not just to say this hurt the Native Americans and everyone sickly distinctly. Like, if someone says this is true always, not denying any exceptions, its defense is impregnable. To quote Mike Tyson, this is how. In other words, I forgot it, but it wasn't one. The bunch of them that we can make. In other words, slavery was caused by a predicate delivery system method. I had a little part within it. But in other words, that is true always. That means we had to counter any criminal enterprise /S associated with it. And that means we had to counter the people pretending to counter it, but still themselves being, roles with entertaining what can't be entertained, and pretending they could speak for the names of locations, areas, and states, and or for the names of our founding parents. In other words, who they still had /have lying. Because that's slavery, overtly, New York City. And it's not by accident all countries have exceptions in exception nature as the exact same thing. All exceptions in exception nature and demonstration of the same thing. Because hyper-exception nature is unlike any one that could be invented. And thank God, hyper-exception nature and everything, in other words, you can't exploit exceptions. You can't make, in other words, you can't make positive out of negative. You can only make hyper-positive out of temporary positive. Or nature will take that temporary positive as an identity of negative value nature and force it from here, leaf of IDs, per science. That being forced space nature transfer. And nature being, this definition of nature being identity, its identity of hypervolume, its identities of identity of hypervolumes, identity of relationship to itself. And the value of that as three distinct volumes, identities of volume, and where volume equals value as nature / nature as value, simultaneously. And the / equals a quality of diffusion, where one identity of volume is a perfect value progression. Therefore, the perfect scientific method and system. This which, for example, which computers were designed to mimic, and with contained logic /S, increasingly incapable of defending their premises treatments and positive and negative treatments, names treatments, identity treatments, and sequence treatments, no. Because that's why the collusion begins so early, with illusions associated with sequence treatments and time mistreatments and value mistreatments. Because in other words, there is one identity of volume that has a tie to all our words as the natural way and reason we are supposed to be using these words and or not using them. But we increasingly have in collusion, differentially, but differentially constantly. Self-value too. Overt criminal enterprises, private ones, the branches of government individually grouped and together, military, all people associated with services, database relationships, all the people true. Thank God we have people, that have still, in other words, the native pure species individual system, grouped only as exception and exception nature and demonstration of the volume /S method in demonstration of how it is making more and more forever nature. Only extent of it is debatable, but originally and still, the science is in collusion with overt criminal enterprises, private ones. So it should be hard to believe people believe remote uses of people pretending other. Because everyone knows that people pretend other, but no one realizes how every individual in every group has maintained uses of every group in defenses of themselves through defenses of themselves as collusion against everyone's self for a method that uses where and how we are fact-cheaping nature, syntax and achieving nature, where and how we would have to use the past, where people we don't even know, and people we know, when we're not around each other, there's illusion. In other words, if someone speaks in illusion, it's an identity theft fraud method. This is not one of the great examples I was going to think, but this is another great example. Anyone who tries to deny that slavery was a part of an identity theft fraud method, they have to hide physical delusions. Self-value too. No, because this is not about identities course. They have to hide criminally foreign influence premises treatments, sequence treatments. And criminally foreign influenced is a phrase needed to be used by the law. I'm not a lawyer, not a police form, not a criminal. No one cares about the long videos. I'm going to try to keep it short. So we can legislate through half of a hyper tribe, or half of a hyper tribe. So we can give three-fourths of possession. We give 100% possession to the Native Americans actual, but the business plan will only preserve our right to and everyone's right to fight using the word like Native American or Native rights, where it is forced grouped distinctly, because in other words, by an unnatural system, a value system that is not the ones that value has a semi-nature relationship to. That system that revealed us individuals and species, not per theory. See, offensively, the theories are, the sciences are recorded self-valued, offensively self-valued. Delusions wrought and criminally foreign influence, individually grouped in together and pretending other, because that was all that was capable of being fathomed. Per this method, with the illusions and the uses of sequence shifting, and name switching and forging tied to the identity theft fraud method. But we have to have mandated law followed outside of courts. And so they have to keep the courts, need to hide lipoaggressions, and they have to keep courts invested with the fake passions and emotions of each age of fact-cheating nature, used remotely. The only place it could be sophistication. And that's including with the nations involved with this, which only obfuscates that which kept and keeps itself fluent through our nations. It was sophistication before each modern country was built. There are proofs, Queen of England, with all respect and love, there are proofs that, and no games, we know the solution has to come, respecting all countries. It has to come through a nature that is being and having been prevented by polarities, inherited also having been blamed on other things, others, and ourselves. And that wasn't the cause of everyone, but it's with the logic, self-value. Manifest is a in other words, there's a sword they have with the letters of the English language in a different pattern. In my theory, there are proofs that this is communications relevant to where and how, distinctly, non-distinctly, and simultaneously. The identities of yin yang and of alpha and of omega and of themselves too, simultaneously, distinctly, non-distinctly, and simultaneously, because there are proofs they were revealed together, and demonstration of needs to discern the hyper invisible with the invisible, such as that which the subject and the predicate have a semi-nature relationship to themselves as as the invisible. See, but we have the sciences offensively that will debate things also with the nature. No, oh, you're crazy. I'll have an expert check. The experts are still recorded, delusions wrought, criminally foreign influence, but roles from remote uses, not just of the interbranch locations, inclusion with instances between people, juxtaposed with overt criminal enterprises and private ones. And hundreds of, in other words, there's the fake sides, and once that's entertained, that's all that needed. Everyone has to increasingly self-value, having been that which is roles keeping and having kept, quality of fact-keeping nature, where and how we have truths that can be used for lies. No, they're not letting anyone hold it and show how they can be used for life, so they can show how the truths need to be used in the conversation about the simultaneous. So they keep all locations individually grouped and together, speak even people's homes, individually grouped and together, even people's neighbors. And this is a method that has complete captive possession over the sense and sensibilities of each age of correlation nature. And relative to where there's a theater where we don't see each other, we don't know what we know. We're being attached to fake words. And more they had all, who you know, what you know, criminally foreign influenced. And needing to be countered. That leaves the future. A whole bunch of people needed to hide lipoaggressions. Just relevant to where and how when people make opinions/convictions about the importance of whether or if not we need to speak about how slavery is important. See, we have courts offensively also with jails, with the leaderships and the people since they were kids, involved with falsified police reports, roles as the criminals known, but also with the victims, in collusion, leaving fake sides of arrays, illusions at streets. Now there's a Heather Hansen, and there are others at Trinity College who recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed. There's a big guy with red hair who was a computer teacher. Never had a verbal conversation with my life. Never had a class with my. He came up to me, he grabbed my wrist one time. It was nonverbal communication. These are people involved leading up to the World Trade Center attack and involved with the spots next to different body dumping spots, and with the killers and people associated with the witness protection program, also recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed, where they have collusions on and off the corners of Griswold Street, also confessed, recorded, demonstrated by my sources, same ones that will pretend other, also recorded, also as evidences. That and how, in other words, people associated with former director of the FBI in Washington, D.C. And he was working with Patton Boggs, so he had to be lying with them or to them. But these are also a whole bunch of people on off a local 230 and other unions involved with thefts of union monies, pension cram downs, uses of kids, where and how they have overt criminal enterprises in other countries involved with job sites, because all these different countries and companies and agreements, and don't forget there are nuclear weapons, and there are people that, we're in a negative value nature progression. Don't forget, there's slavery. Nature is going to continue to demonstrate negative value nature progressions, acts in nature, not just overall, but grouped and individually. More and more, they knew that no one would, not only would they wouldn't have free speech. Once someone says we don't have free speech, no one will be able to receive that. No one would be able to receive the nature of the law at ground locations here. See YouTube ground, or gather round. Police. We have to counter arrest. We have to use the names of service people. We have a good, and we have to stop uses of a bad. And see, they knew we'd have to say that too. So we have to stop the counters to it that are pretending they're only counting uses of a bad, but they're in collusion with the uses of a bad because they're in collusion with fact treatments. At each age of fact treatment nature, on off locations, there are database relationships because they are victims there. Where and how they are increasingly self-valuing, where and how they are hiding victim reactions there, where and how they are self-valuing, where they need to hide from correlation nature's means to discern that through time, and then looking when people need to look back at the past, where and how they have roles with uses of locations, just even walking by people, and then they pretend to know people. So there's a pattern of people that walked up to me, went out of their way to pretend they know me, for real and or juxtaposed. Also, made up lies, in other words. And these are the same type of people who pretend, oh, this person is lying, they're pretending passions, emotions against strangers. They're also involved with use of repeating other people's names to strangers. And repeating theirs to those people so they can play games between campuses where and how there is a vertical and horizontal, unhindered, database oriented and involved breaching method worse than war crimes. But that again is maintained at all locations. So thank God there is that too simultaneously. For the same reason, thank God, slavery is an identity that has nature demonstrate negative value nature progressions, acts and natures. For example, relevant to why and how we discern the difference, we hyper discern the difference between, its identity of volume, its identity of volume's identity of relationship to itself, and the value of that, per its system, per value, per our uses of words. And not where and how they have all exceptions in exception nature employed to quote, perfect world. value exploited, where and how they are shock and awe, quote, shock and awe, unquote, and where and how they use quotes, Connecticut interbranch, private, as the same ones with overt criminal enterprises, private in hundreds of countries, involved with what? Worse than that, kept and keeps them effectively remotely. You kept needing to hide the same sequence shift, finite act of progressive lies. Oh, Anthony, how could you know all this? It's recorded that and how I asked many times to report, even on their uses of Facebook pages. New Britain Superior Courts, passion crimes. They do the passion crimes because they were caught with a whole bunch of people tied to Joseph Dennis. And to his family also recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed, by them, by Joseph Dennis. I had there was virtually no conversation at all or anything with his family, or his brother John DeMorrow or John Dennis either. John DeMorrow is one of the ones involved with people at New Britain Superior Court and Central Connecticut State University and Hartford courts, involved with overt criminal enterprises and drugs and medicines crimes and sexual crimes with little kids that are off campuses associated, used to hide life progressions and to forge kids individually grouped and together, needed to self-value illusions, where and how those illusions were also fact, cheap in nature, predicate, act-oriented, and then further and further other natures of things and motivations. So in other words,